Hello and welcome. It's Vicky Midwood here, your host on Raw Chatter. And again, I have a guest with me today. I am not flying solo. I have the wonderful MJ, Mandy Jane Lacey, who is an inclusion specialist. And this is a lady who has got so much to share with you guys. So you might even want to get pen and paper poised to take down some notes or some nuggets of inclusion inspiration amongst other things. So, MJ, welcome and thank you so much for jumping onto the podcast with me today. Can you just let our listeners know where you're coming in from?
I certainly currently in Cardiff, in Wales. That's where I am today.
Fabulous. And have you been in Wales for a long time? Is it your hometown?
It is my hometown. I'm not even Wenglish yet. I come from North Yorkshire. I'm a soft southerner. I was born down south, although nobody knows it. And I've had all my children in Yorkshire, which is, of course, God's own country, according to my eldest. So I've lived in Scarborough since I was the tender age of 17, and I left there 14 months ago to come to Wales to retrain as a social worker. I'm a teacher and a therapist already, so this will be a third career choice.
That's fantastic. And why particularly Wales? I know it's not a million miles away from Yorkshire in terms of how wonderful the countryside and the people are, but what made you pick Wales?
You're right, geographically, and as far as the population, Wales is actually quite a great replication of North Yorkshire. And indeed, there are pockets of deprivation in Wales that are very similar to North Yorkshire, as well as pockets of not being deprived, let's say. And so Wales really is about the only part of the United Kingdom that I could see would almost replicate where I'd been for 30 years. Oh, I just told you I'm older than 21. Don't tell anyone. Uh, and, uh, and so I came to Wales because I felt that my experience in England would be very well served. And Wales has something called the Social Services and Wellbeing Act of Wales, which was passed in 2015, and it's a second to none document that provides the future pathway for health and social care, which is a very important part of not only my own personal life, but that of the citizens that I work with. So I wanted to be in a part of the world that they say about Wales, that everything they're doing in Wales, they'll be doing in England in 15 years' time. I've always been a future focused practitioner. So to be
Good.
somewhere that's already 15 years ahead means that I'm ahead of the game.
Fantastic, which can have its plus points and can also have its kind of derogatory points because people are a little bit loath to move forward, aren't they, often? So, but let people know because I came across you via somebody else's video. Pete Cohen put a video out and you were the star of the show in terms of how you met up with Pete and what was going on for you. So do you want to explain a little bit about that little video and what I kind of perhaps would have seen that made me want to feel as if you were a great guest for the podcast?
Absolutely. So Pete Cohen is my coach. He's been coaching me for 2 years. I met him on a social media app, an audio social media app called Clubhouse. Pete was an early adopter of Periscope and was very early onto social media, I understand. But I met him in the last 2 years on the audio social media map of Clubhouse. And I got the app on February the 14th. I think that's quite important
Right.
on that day of love. And
Yeah.
the very next day, I went into a room at 5 a.m. because I'm an early riser, realized that somebody was on Clubhouse that wasn't American, and fell into Pete's room and realized that actually, energetically, I was without doubt, undoubtedly, irrefutably in the right place. And we connected straight away. Straight away. So Pete was doing morning meetings,
Yeah.
social rooms at 5 a.m. During lockdown. In fact, he just lost a member of his family, his mum,
I remember
and
it.
he
Yeah.
was really working through that. And I was in a hospital bed in my lounge,
Wow.
um, really not in a good place, transferring to a commode with a slide board and having 24-hour care at home. And really, that room was a lifeline at that time to not only the outside world, but to other energy alchemists who understood that time and space knows no bounds when communicating.
Yeah, right. And so this is where kind of the video and the story comes in, because you have had all kinds of physical issues, and I hate the term, and you probably hate it too, but you are classed as a disabled citizen. And the video was of you with your struggles with parking your car and getting, well, it wasn't a car, actually, it was a van, wasn't it? And actually getting yourself and your wheelchair to the car park, which was a million miles away from where the venue that you were staying in was, in the hotel. And you actually been able to open the doors and get in, and you were going to do it on your own, weren't you? And this is where Pete sort of asked, "Would you like a hand?" And hence the video. And I just thought, yeah, I can see that the energy that was coming from you was very much, I am an independent lady. But what I loved about the video more than anything was the conversation that you guys were having on the way to your vehicle, because you were talking about very matter of factly the things that are kind of frustrating and that hack you off, and that you want something done about. And I was like, yeah, I need to speak to this lady, because this is the stuff that we can all relate to some extent. But you were actually saying, I think, what a lot of people were thinking and what a lot of people want to say. So you were in a wheelchair, and just to let people know, is that where you spend a lot of your time, or are you mobile at times? Do you just need a wheelchair when you're out and about? Do you want to let people, and do you want to share with what actually you have gone through? Because you mentioned there that you were in a hospital bed in your own house, having to transfer to a commode, which I'm sure is just like, I can't even imagine how challenging that must be, but also needing somebody to be with you all of the time as well, and never having space for yourself. So share a little bit about what is going on for you at the moment.
Okay, so I've been in a wheelchair since I was 32, and as we know, that was a little time away, a couple of decades.
Wow.
And I went into a wheelchair because of I've got a musculoskeletal condition. I've got a chronic condition which is life limiting, and it affects all of my joints. I also have osteo and rheumatoid arthritis and osteoporosis. My joints aren't replaceable. That's the problem, and they're also very, very hyperflexive. So I'm hypermobile.
Right.
I'm
Wow.
incredibly
God.
bendy. Everything
Super
dislocates. My
bendy
shoulders,
lady.
they come out of, you can put my hands backwards. It's a bit
Oh,
of a
wow.
trick, bit of a party trick. So I've been in the wheelchair for 2 decades, and coming out of hospital into was a hospital bed because my lift was broken. I do have a lift in my home in Scarborough. I've been in
Right.
there for about 17 years. It needed replacing, funnily enough. It broke during COVID, of course, difficult
Of
for it to be
course.
replaced. I was
Whoa.
intubated for 19 weeks after my heart stopped, and my carer resuscitated me on the floor.
Oh my goodness.
Um, I went into York District from Scarborough. I wasn't aware I was taken into York. Nobody thought I would come out. The only living family member was called. They came to see me through a window, and
Oh God.
I carried on breathing.
Wow.
Coming off intubation, they put a DNAR on me, which is do not artificially resuscitate.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I came round for a little while. Was aware of what was being said. Kind of, I was out of the ICU. Then I was in the next one, which is critical care, I believe, before you go on to the coronary care ward.
Right.
And I asked what was going on. I managed to get some sense. I was told I had a DNAR. I through the oxygen mask asked to call the doctor, asked for the doctor to come. I was told it was a group of doctors that had made that decision, so I asked to see the group of doctors.
Good for you.
They weren't very keen on the idea, and I
Of course.
explained that I would be son, and so they came. I asked them to remove it and explained if they didn't, then I would have to get somebody from the legal services to sort that out.
Yeah.
and I wouldn't sleep until they did. So I literally stayed awake all night until the decision was made to take the DNA out. Once it was, I went to sleep with the
Excuse me.
oxygen, and eventually got home, much to the surprise of the doctors, because they didn't actually think I'd get off oxygen. They thought it would be very difficult, and they were very frightened that I would be coming home with oxygen. It's a major thing
Right.
to be able to transfer oxygen everywhere, and so it was a real fight. But I did. I got off oxygen and got home, and it was in one of Pete's rooms. Actually, the third time my heart had stopped, and I'd been back in, and actually they'd already heard me on Clubhouse. I was out of hospital and I was recovering, and then back in again. And so I went on Clubhouse because it was the 6 o'clock, and Pete had moved his room to 6 o'clock,
Yeah.
and I went in, and he said, I went on stage. And he said, "We've been worried about you. You okay?" And I just said, "Yeah, I need to get cardiovascular fit, Pete." And he said to me then that in his head he was saying, "What do you mean, woman? You need to take a breath. Actually,
Yeah.
you need to
Breathe.
recover. You don't. What do you mean? You're not going to survive the day, let alone get cardiovascular fit. What are you saying? This woman's not going to actually survive." And he said, didn't like to say anything, but like, what? Couldn't have been any
Yeah.
further from where he thought I'd be.
Amazing.
And I had
So,
to make
just
some change.
what do you think gave you that determination and that strong sense of you guys are going to listen to me and you're going to do what I'm telling you to do? Because if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And you did stay awake until they did it, so you did follow through. What do you think gave you that determination to just go, no, this is not happening?
Well, apart from the fact that I'm a mum, okay. So I knew I wanted to be a parent at 13. There's not very many teenagers say to their school teachers, "Yep, when I leave school, I'm going to be a mum. I'm having babies." That's not what they want to hear from a 13-year-old. I already knew at 13 that I was born with a metaphorically a bottle in one hand and a Hoover in the other, said my friend Tracy when we went to college. Um, but I had all three of my children. I had my first at 21, and so my eldest is 31 this year. There we go, telling my age again. Considering I'm 21, that's good time travel. I am Doctor Who, and it's very important to me that I finish the jobs that I complete, that I start. So complete the jobs I started. And the children were independent. So I called them the children. And of course, they're all over 18 now.
They're always our
And
kids, no matter what age, are they?
always my babies. So,
Yeah,
so what gives me the determination is if I hadn't finished. Not only had I not finished them becoming independent and therefore not my job, but I
yeah.
also have a bigger job to solve, and that I've been moving through the world now for a couple of decades with the
Mm.
DDA, which is the Disability Discrimination Act, in place, which was very exciting to know it was there. And when I learned about it, and the Disability Equality Duty of 2010, we're talking about that being 23 years ago. Right?
That's
So
a
yeah,
long
no,
time.
sorry, 13 years ago, lying, but 20, yeah, over 20 years ago for the DDA.
The original
And
one,
so
yeah.
yeah, I was just very excited to see that the world was going to catch up with the fact that I moved through the world differently. And
Yeah.
I'm not the only person that moves through the world differently. Blind people move through the world differently, so do people that are deaf. So that there are a myriad of differences. So I was just excited to see when I was going to be included, and still waiting.
But I was going to say, and I think you will be waiting for quite a while when we look at what is going on and the way that people view disability and anything that is not, in inverted commas, the norm, whatever that is. But I want to just delve a little bit more into, because when you say I've spent 20 years in a wheelchair, can I take you back a little bit, if it's all right? And just when did you find out that that was going to be kind of your future, that you were going to be having to use a wheelchair, and how did that affect you emotionally? And did you at any point feel, I don't want to do this, what's the point? Just tell us a little bit about how it affects when somebody kind of recognizes that that's what's going to happen, that's what's your future's going to be.
Yeah, so I struggled on two sticks when I shouldn't have for a long, long time, to the point I'm talking maybe 18 months actually after my hip. I fell in town. I dislocated my hip. It ended up like somewhere on my head.
Whoa.
And at that point, I had an operation which I have no feeling down the left-hand side from the waist down now. Um,
Right.
and and I have different feeling. I think in the right side, it's definitely not as sensitive at the bottom as it is at the top.
Right.
Um, so I was trying to manage on two sticks against all of the advice. And the
Okay.
last time that I walked, I say walked in the loosest sense of the word, I decided to take my mobility vehicle with my wheelchair in the back, with my children down to McDonald's for breakfast. And at the end of the road, it was on a pedestrian area. It was only a few shops down at the road in Scarborough. And anyone that knows where the McDonald's is, it literally is at the end of the road. It's a few shops away. And we parked at the end, and I decided I was going to use my sticks. I already had calluses on both hands and blisters. But I was very arrogant. I was very ashamed. I didn't want to
Mm.
use the wheelchair if I didn't need to, and I felt I had the strength to do it, and I knew we had the time, and they were serving breakfast till 10:30, and it was only 9 o'clock, and I we all got out of the car and started moving towards McDonald's, and older people were passing me and going, "You know that you can get a mobility scooter from just there. You're aware that you don't have to do this. Do you know she's got this from the local authority, this wheelchair?" Well, the children, of course, knew that my wheelchair was in there, and they were. So by the time we got to McDonald's, it was 25 to 11. And
No.
at that
Oh,
point, when they flipped the things over to lunch, and the children were like, "Ah, it was a McMuffin breakfast we wanted, not some dinner." I was
yeah.
like, I was very upset. I was hot. I was burning. I was sweating. I was very uncomfortable. I felt like a failure.
Right.
We got sat down eventually, and they had to have whatever it was, fries. And I just knew at that point that I was being so stubborn that actually the means did not justify the ends.
Right.
And so I
But
listened to
that
the
gamut of emotions that went through, and the physical, and this is what I kind of want people to really take on board, because I don't think it's something that you can experience for sure. But I'm sure that descriptively you can help people to understand that you described there the calluses on your hands, how hot you felt, that the effort of trying to move. And when you've got your whole body weight that you are trying to move forward and you can't feel some of it at all, that what when you're doing that, is there anything going through your head, or are you just 100% focused on getting the next foot in front of the other and keeping on moving?
I think that's of all, taking one foot and put it in front of the other, whether that's energetically or physically or literally or metaphorically. And I don't really have another version of myself. I'm not sure where that comes from or why. Um, I think, to be honest, coming from a challenging background means that challenge is something you're friends with or you become friends with because you have to do. And so the feelings are that of shame, because not to be the same as other people is not to belong, and to not belong against our human nature. We are tribal. And so to not be the same as others is mortifying at cellular level, at the very core of me.
Mm.
To be excluded, to be differently able, to be ostracized. And so at that point, when I realized that I was to be differently able and moving through the world had to change, I then had to enter a whole new world, where I was no longer the provider, but the
Right.
participant.
Wow. And that's one hell of a shift, isn't it, for you to go through energetically and emotionally. One thing that's stuck out for me there is just thinking about did there ever come a point, or has there come a point in the challenges that you've gone through where you've ever just thought, oh, this is just so hard? Why am I
Yes.
still fighting? Yeah. And has there ever been a time where, because obviously my specialism is looking at addiction and compulsive behaviors and that sort of stuff, and particularly when you're somebody who has a lot of pain. So I've worked with people with fibromyalgia, and that pain when it hits, we don't know how long is it going to last for. It could be a couple of hours, it could be 20 minutes, it could be a few days, and we don't know. And often turning to food for comfort, for familiarity, or trying to just numb the pain with alcohol is something that many of them have kind of dabbled into. And for some, they've been able to recognize actually it's really not helpful and they don't want to do it anymore. But for others, that in and of itself becomes kind of something that actually they can almost feel like they're controlling, even though at times it feels like it's controlling them. So have you ever kind of struggled with that side of things, whether it's smoking weed or taking painkiller or whatever it happens to be? Have you kind of come across that yourself?
I was born coming across it. So I have
Right.
a predisposition to being obsessional. And the
Right.
reason I have a predisposition for that is not just because I'm a determined lady, but also because I'm neurodivergent. I didn't know I was
Yeah.
neurodivergent until the 3 children were diagnosed. I was told when the first one was diagnosed that you only get one in a family, you only get one autistic person in a family. Yeah, okay. And then they worked out, actually, Gilbert worked out in 1986 that actually you could have one up the family tree, one across the family, and one down the family tree. And generally, you got one at one end, one at the other, and one in the middle. And I had 3 children, so they looked at me and said, "Well, you've been married twice to different men, so you must be the missing link." And therefore they assessed me in my 30s. Beautiful, going into a wheelchair and work out your neurodivergent in third. And so my predisposition to obsessional or compulsive behavior, um, or addictive behavior, was in me, uh,
Yeah.
within me. And so first struggled with was bulimia. So
Right.
I'm a recovered bulimic. I used to purge in
Yeah.
order to feel in control, and I've been every dress size there is, from a dress size 4 and age 14 trousers when I was very, very ill, and under 6 stone, to a size 28. And I don't know what weight I was because I didn't get weighed at that point because I didn't want to. Evans, at the end of Evans, right? So what?
Remember.
We're
Yeah.
nearly at the end of Evans. Be careful, they only go up to a 32. And
Wow.
I remember the Christmas that I was in a size 28, and I was really, really very, very unwell. I wasn't drinking at that point, but drinking has been a go-to mechanism when people died or left
Right.
me. Dad went on a bus when I was 17. We don't know whether he walked into the face of the bus or whether he walked over halfway and then turned back again. He was
Wow.
alcoholic, and
Wow.
I believe that he walked back into the face of the bus. When I turned him off, because I had 6 weeks bed in Middlesbrough General, he was run
Gosh.
over by a bus as a road traffic accident. 6 weeks on life support, and I was asked to turn him off, and
Gosh. That's a
at
hell
that
of a
point,
thing for you. Were you told to do it or did you have to make the decision?
I asked, we were told his brain wasn't responding and that they were
Right.
keeping his body alive. And my brother was not really in a position at that point, well, emotionally. And so it was uh, it had been a long 6 weeks,
Right. And so it was
and it
down
was
to
time.
you then.
It was time. I was 17. My mum wasn't
Wow.
able to come. The police had contacted Radio Sheffield, to say that they'd found this man and they were looking for his family. And my mum rang me and said, "I'm sorry." Well, gave a message to my next door neighbour. At that point, we didn't have mobile phones, right? And
Right.
the next door neighbour came and said, "You need to talk to." So I went to a phone box and rang her, and she said, I can't come. I can't do it. The police are coming to find you." And they knocked at the door, and they said the police were coming. She didn't actually tell me what was going on. She just said she couldn't do anything for me. And the police came and
Wow.
said, Miss Lace, are you Miss Lace? Yes. Your dad's in Middlesbrough General and he's on life support machines. So it was winter, and I drove to Middlesbrough actually in a borrowed car, borrowing a fiver to put some petrol in. It had no handbrake, and we were in the snow. So yeah, it was a difficult time. And after I turned things off, and we buried my dad, and my grandma, his mother, died 6 weeks later of a broken heart, and we buried her on top of him. Thankfully, we double dug him.
Wowzers.
Um, I ended up in hospital. I ended up in a mental health institution. And all I can remember is putting my hand out for medication. In fact, when I came out 3 months later, I told everybody that they didn't have a cafeteria and they didn't feed me because I couldn't remember having any food.
Wow.
But of course, they must have.
Yeah. But and so is that one of the catalysts? Because you said bereavement, that alcohol was a thing. So while that was going on, because I'm just envisioning, when my mum was in hospital, and they kind of brought all of the family into the room and said, kind of prepare yourselves, we think she's not going to pull through. And I mean, I was already in the midst of my alcohol dependence then, but that was just like another excuse for me to kind of drink even more, because obviously the justification to myself, well, who wouldn't when they've just got the news that their mum's going to die, kind of thing. So did you find that when that 6 week period, were you turning to alcohol then, or was it afterwards?
No, it was afterwards. It was afterwards when I returned to Scarborough, tried to go back to work at Glazebrook Interior Architects. I'm not sure I should say that, but there we are. I was an admin apprentice, and I went to work the day after the funeral.
Right.
Say what? And I
Well,
remember just telling them that they could take their job and put it where the sun never shine, and that I was done doing secretarial things for some woman that didn't appreciate me, and goodbye and farewell. And
drama.
I was very, very, very unwell,
Right.
and it was then that I went to the doctors, I asked for help, I got medication. They gave me that yuppie drug that they gave to everybody that came from America, that was an antidepressant, Prozac.
Prozac.
There we are.
Yep.
And I'd never wanted to cut myself in the middle of my life. It was never something I'd either imagined or thought of or envisaged. And Prozac just made me slash myself to smithereens. Um, I have I have scars all over my left arm from the many slashes and deep cuts that I made, which added to the idea that they would have sectioned me had I not been a voluntary patient. But when they found me, when the doctor was called, I was behind the door, on the floor, having slashed myself a number of times,
Wow.
trying to rid myself of the pain and let out, because cutting at that point, when I was taking Prozac, and for some people, Prozac is fantastic, don't get me wrong,
Yep.
but for me, it certainly wasn't. I have no history of any self-harm whatsoever. It had not been
Right.
something I'd done physically for self-harm. Obviously, chemically, etc., there'd been harm, but physically self-harm, never.
Wow.
And it was an obsession. I couldn't help myself. It was
Mm.
just the only way to let the pain out.
Let
And
the
so I
pain
was
out.
found cutting myself. And the doctor, Dr. Timperley, an older
Mm.
gentleman who I very much respect, to me that day, it doesn't have to be like this. It will
Right.
it will get better. There is something beyond here. And so
Amazing
I
that
agreed
that guy was able to share that with you, and for you to believe him enough, because that's half of the battle, isn't it? In what is your head telling you? Because if your head's telling you that's a load of rubbish and you don't believe it, it makes it really, really difficult. And I think what I'd just like our listeners to understand is, which you did qualify there, is that Prozac can and does help some people, but we've got to remember that just like food or alcohol or any substance that goes inside our body, we don't know how it's going to affect us, because how our receptors and our hormonal system, our neurotransmitters, how our kidney breaks stuff down, our whole system of assimilation is very individual. And so there is no, this will help you and you'll feel this, and this, or this won't, because we just don't know. And this is where also helping people to understand that self-harm is a way of releasing pain. But like bulimia, the actual action of doing it becomes very addictive. So it's not the stuffing in the food necessarily for bulimics, it's the getting rid of it. It's the vomiting and the throwing up bit that's the addictive part of it. That's why we want to keep on doing it. And it's the same, isn't it, with self-harm, that it gives you what you want, and forget the consequences. They don't pop into your head. When you feel the need to release that pain, it's instantaneous. And this is where it can be a challenge to get over it. So they sectioned you, I'm assuming, then, or not? You were voluntary.
Well, they were to section me, okay. And they said that, there was a doctor and there was somebody else, there was a psychiatrist, and there were my potential in-laws, because I was actually then I was at my partner's in-laws' house because we'd moved in with them, right? Because we were
Right.
not okay on our own.
Right.
And so it was a group thing. They were talking about me, but not without me. And
Right.
I realized that if I did say yes, that this policeman was not going to get me, basically. That's how I felt, that if I
Right.
didn't, if I did as I should, then it was going to be less scary. And I was quite scared. I was quite scared.
Totally.
And so I agree. And I got to say that the doctor was just very gentle. And it was his love, really, the fact that he was there for a person, not for a patient number, that
Right.
made me realize that he really, it's a difficult job. I now understand proof health practitioner, and I understand the premise as a trainee social worker of how somebody becomes with their liberty reduced and into a mental health institution, and how serious that is, and how many people it takes to sign that off, and who
Yeah.
needs to agree. But he did it in such a way that I was a voluntary patient, which meant that once I was in there, negotiation for my freedom, as it for me to be safely back out in the community, was much easier. And he must have known that. I knew nothing about the Mental Health Act at that point. I
Right.
just knew that it couldn't go on. I knew I needed something. I didn't know what, but I think it was probably just a rest from the world.
I was going to say that sometimes is what we need, a complete change of environment and circumstances, and just the time and the space to be able to just go for a moment, which is what happened to me when I was in rehab. And people who have read my story a little bit, and I've shared this before, will know that was the biggest thing. And I share it in the chapter of the book that I'm in. And it was just that space to actually find out, what am I really feeling, what am I really thinking, how am I, who am I? For me was more the thing. And just jumping back into what you were saying, that I can kind of see why you have the determination and the drive that you do, because from a very young age you were forced into, from what you've said, situations like your mum basically saying, I'm not coming, you deal with it, at 17, to actually have to get on with it and just deal with it. And so this is where, when you recognize, I think early on, that you have got the ability, that you are capable of doing this, even though there might be a horrific fallout afterwards, in and of that moment, you did and you could do it. And this is part of what kind of you're doing now, isn't it? Because you're helping people to recognize that there is more available to them, and they don't have to put up with not being included. And by the way, there is this happening and this happening, and let's help you to get a part of it. And so just share with our listeners now some of the amazing stuff that you are helping people to be able to do because of your adverse circumstances and what you've learned.
Absolutely. So I call myself an inclusion specialist because, as I've said earlier, I span education, mental well-being, and now health and social care. And I believe they are important tenets for a human being's life, particularly if they experience intersectionality or difference. So in order for me to lift myself out of what I found, which was the poverty of welfare benefits, the poverty of disability benefits, the poverty of having a husband then who was rapid cycling bipolar, moving on a little to the man that I married. Then after that, he was diagnosed with that condition, and my own challenges, and then the children being born, all of whom have some neurodivergence or systemic condition that comes from genetics.
Yeah.
I then had to move through all of those areas. So I went to the Open University and accessed something called Disabled Students Allowance. I then graduated and wanted to work and became a teacher after being a nursery nurse, because nursery nurses don't get paid as well as teachers. And so I became a teacher. I then went into work, and at some point in that journey, learned about access to work. Access to Work is a good program to help disabled people move into and remain in workfulness. But there are challenges with all of these systems. I accessed psychotherapy for many, many years through the NHS because I was a person that they recognised really required some heavy duty therapeutic intervention. And I'm very grateful to my therapist, Robert Tyson, who is a tireless advocate of people being accepted and acceptable. I graduated from him and he actually became my clinical supervisor. So I went into psychotherapeutic training with a gap between being therapist and then supervisee. And he
Cool.
actually had the psychotherapy counselling service that we developed in Scarborough before COVID. So I've moved through all of these things, and through my experience, I realised that actually none of it was connected. Nobody, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. People didn't know what to put in what order or in what way. Nobody knew what they were entitled to, and nobody told them. And
Yeah.
so, whilst I was in Scarborough for 15 years, I helped people through a charity, which I founded, to circumnavigate all of these systems and put them all together and create a life that they thought was worth living. So honed that down a little
Right.
and found focus. And workfulness, I believe, is one of the ways through these challenges, as is education. So I have founded Accessibility Partners. Accessibility Partners can be found at www.a number 2w.me. That stands for Access to Work Me. And the
Love it.
reason that we need access to work people is because although it takes 26 weeks currently, nearly 10 months actually, when it gets all told, to put in place the help that you need. So say I get a job today,
Hmm.
I will have my access to work support. That's the reasonable adjustments needed to help me be within about 10 months. We
Wow. So you're
intend
not
that,
going to be able to work until December.
well, uh, we
That's
help people manage that gap between. So you get the job, you have to start the job, right? You haven't got a choice. And most employers don't know that this is out there, neither do they know how to get it.
no.
So I am not only working with individuals at ground level, so at the chalk face or at the workless face, to know how to apply and how to manage that gap between, but also we're working with leaders to help them understand what is there in order that they can spread that down to their workforce. So Accessibility Partners provides job coaching and personal assistance for the
Fabulous.
Access to Work program, and also helps people circumnavigate the plethora of paperwork and protocols and practices that they need to circumnavigate in order to just get to the end of that 10 months, let alone get what they're entitled to.
And that is such a worthwhile service, because the amount of people I am sure who are just not doing stuff because they don't know how to go about it, or are not claiming what they're entitled to because they didn't even know that they were entitled to it. So you are somebody who is filling in that huge gap that is so desperately needed. And those links and the website information and what have you, folks, if you were scribbling down, don't worry, they'll be in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, they'll be in the description. So you'll be able to click on those links. And on talking of links, because I'm sure that you are wanting people to connect with you and have conversations, and you want to offer their services to leaders who may be able to help get the word out and what have you. So can you share with us what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Absolutely. So if they go onto our website and click that contact page, or send an email to info at a2w.me, then they will get a response from one of my personal assistants. And we're a growing team. We are literally growing as we speak. I can't really grow fast enough, although we need to do it slowly, catching on, listening carefully
Yes.
so that what we're providing is of quality. We are person-centered and outcomes-driven, and I like to think that everything we do holds water across, the DWP, health and social care, and mental health well-being. And so we have a lot of I's to cross and to dot and T's to cross. So that's the way to get in touch. From that point, there'll be a meet, usually on Zoom for 20 minutes, where we just gather what somebody's wanting. And there's also some information on the contact page you can pop in there just to give us an idea. If you don't know what you want, then just ask. If you're sitting and you don't know, you're sitting and you're saying, well, actually, yes, I'm disabled. No, I don't know what I'm entitled to, and actually, I don't know a way forward. I want to go to work, or I am at work and I'm struggling, or I'm at work and actually I think I can cope anymore, and I don't know the way forward, and I certainly don't know how to ask somebody, because it's a very difficult question to ask. Many neurodivergent social workers just now, right now, if you have a look on LinkedIn, many of them are saying that actually it's very difficult to speak up to managers that don't understand how it can be to have a sensory overload, or to feel very emotionally touched by a situation and need a moment, or need to step outside, or need a real adjustment. And actually, people feel that they cannot be who they are or express in the way that they are for fear of being seen as unprofessional or capable. And indeed, they also feel that if they apply for access to work, that in some way it will see them as not capable for being seen for other jobs, or for for moving up in their profession. So we have to move this discrimination, is what it is. It's unfortunately, you know. When we hold negative assumptions, when we hold that unconscious bias, which we all do, every
Yeah,
one
we
of
do.
us,
Yep.
it's because we look to see ourselves. There's a part of our brain that likes to look for what we are, to look for something that looks safe. And we only
Yep.
know what's safe by our previous experiences. And when we see something that doesn't look or sound feel like us, there's a part of our brain that shouts help. And it comes right back from, ancient times when we were running away from wolves or whatever. And actually, it's not useful right now, but it's how we judge a situation. We think in stereo, we think in dual, we're constantly assessing the danger, and as a result, it can be very challenging not to misunderstand the and so that we've got to remember that unconscious bias is more than a preference, and actually we have to examine our own unconscious bias in order that we can be providers or facilitators that know that we're doing that, in order that we can include people and not judge. I'm going to be really terrible now. There's somebody just knocked at my door.
All right. On that note, I'm going to say thank you so much, and I'm going to let you go. We'll put all of MJ's details, and if you want to find out more of what she's up to and what she's already done, go check out her LinkedIn profile. And have a lovely day. Thank you for your time, my darling. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.